So before you do any type of home brewing, one of the most important things that you have to do is ensure that you're working with sanitized tools and all of your equipment has been sanitized. So what I'm doing is I'm pouring 5 gallons of hot tap water into a pail, and then I'll be adding about an ounce of Star San sanitizer. This is a kitchen grade sanitizer. It's what they use in commercial kitchens, and it is the best thing that I have found and have been recommended to use for home brewing. One thing that I always do is I keep a bottle of mixed up sanitizer in a spray bottle, and I'll use this anytime I'm connecting parts or touching anything that I may have contaminated just with my hands, and it's just one way of ensuring that everything that you do when home brewing has a sanitized surface. Today I'm going to do step 3 of really the home brewing process, and that is kegging your beer that has been sitting in either your primary or secondary fermentation carboy, and this has been fermenting for about 6 weeks in the glass carboy, so it should be in really good shape and excellent flavor, and the sediments will have settled down, so it's going to be very clear. But one of the first things that I'm going to be doing is taking some sterilization solution that I've prepared, and I'm going to be running it through my Cornelius kegs. These are Pepsi kegs or Coca-Cola kegs, and hey Rocky, and I will sterilize those before I transfer any beer from the secondary fermentation carboy into the kegs. One of the first things to do after preparing your sterilization solution is really sterilizing your tools, your equipment. And so what I'm doing right now is I'm siphoning off some of the sterilization solution and putting it into one of my Cornelius kegs, and then I will sterilize the keg and all of the other equipment that the beer will potentially pass through from end to end. Another thing that I use is something called keg lube. It's almost like Vaseline, but what it is it's almost like a petroleum jelly that you can smear onto the rubber gaskets of your the top that seals your Cornelius keg. And what that does is it really makes a great seal. So when you pressurize the keg with CO2, you won't have any leaks of, the pressure will stay pressurized in the keg and you won't have any leaks. Now I've put the keg lube onto the O-ring gasket that is used for sealing the cap onto the Cornelius keg, and I'm going to now put the cap onto the keg and begin to pressurize and sterilize my secondary keg. I've now hooked up the original keg that I put the sterilization solution in to a line that will be fed out of the keg through a filter and then into another keg. I'll use 2 kegs and a filter, and what the intent of this is to put the beer that is in the glass carboy that has been fermenting into one keg, channel it through a filter into a second keg, and then reverse the process and then push it from the second keg through the filter and back into the keg that you'll be serving the beer out of. And what will happen is the filter will catch any impurities in the 2 different phases of filtering the beer from one keg to another and back to the original keg. And to start this, all I'll need to do is hook up my CO2 tank. I've got basically it's a paintball tank that I hooked a regulator up to, and I will pressurize the tank holding the solution, and we will begin to sterilize all of the equipment here end to end. I've now hooked up my CO2 tank to the keg holding the solution, and I'm just going to open up the regulator and allow the tank to pressurize. And what this will do is it's going to push the sterilization solution from the first keg through the filter, through all the filter lines, into the second keg. As you can see, now the sterilization solution is going through all the contained kegs. When I filter beer, I filter it twice. And for that reason, I have two different qualities of filter. I've got one filter that it's a 1 micron filter, and that's a very fine filter used to get many of the impurities out of water. And then the second filter that I'll do as I filter the beer into the final keg is I'll use a 0.5 micron filter, and this will really catch most, if not all, of the remaining sediments that may be in the beer, and this will help the beer be very clear when you pour the glass. Now that I've got all of my kegs and filters sterilized, I'm going to now transfer the beer from the glass carboy that's been fermenting for about 6 weeks or so, and I will be siphoning that off and putting it into the keg to begin the filtration process. You can see within the keg there's still some sudsy residue from sterilizing the tank, which is fine. It's commercial kitchen grade cleaner and is edible, but I do try to get as much of it off as I can. But it's a completely sterilized tank except for maybe the top where I've touched it to take the lid off. As you can see, I've now started to siphon the beer from the secondary fermentation carboy, and it will go into the keg, and then I will begin to filter it once everything has been transferred into the keg. This process takes 5 minutes max. It doesn't take very long. I've now transferred the beer from the glass carboy into the keg, and the next step is I've hooked my CO2 onto the keg, and I'm just going to apply just a little bit of gas, and I just want enough so that the beer will flow through my filter, through the filter lines, and then up into my second keg here, where you can see it's flowing, where I'll hold it and then push it back through the filter a second time into the keg that I'll be serving it out of. So this process, I'll try to make it'll probably take about 10-15 minutes, because I want the beer to flow really slowly through this filter. The beer's now been transferred from the first keg to the second keg, and so what I'm doing now is I'm putting in the 0.5 micron filter, and we'll reverse the flow of the beer from one keg to the other, which is going to be the final filtration process. And at that point then I will apply CO2 and carbonate the beer before we can drink it. So that'll be our next step, is to filter it one more time. I've got the final keg hooked up to the filter, which has the really fine filter into the holding keg, and now I'm just going to apply a little bit of CO2 to pressurize the tank and to begin the flow into the filter. So you can see it's beginning to go through the filter, and I'll go through this process one more time. The end product will end up in this keg, at which point then I'll begin to carbonate it. To keep things moving ahead as I'm filtering the beer one last time, I've taken the glass carboy that I transferred the beer out of, and now I'm just cleaning it. I'm siphoning more of the sterilization solution into the carboy, and I will scrub that clean and have it ready for the next time I brew another batch of beer. I've now completed transferring the beer from the holding keg through the filter through the second time into the serving keg, and I've hooked up my CO2 tank, and now I'm just going to bleed off the oxygen that may be in this tank and put a small layer of CO2 on top of the keg so that when I carbonate it, I'll chill it first for a day or so, and then I'll put CO2 on the tank. That way the beer will absorb it quicker. It won't take as much CO2 to carbonate when the beer is chilled. But right now I need to make sure that I bleed the tank a bit and get any oxygen that may be in the beer out of the tank, which is now going to be pushed out by the CO2. I do this about 10-15 times. That should be good. Now I've hooked a temporary picnic tap onto the keg, and I'm going to just take a little bit of the beer off and put it into my hydrometer so I can get one final hydrometer reading to measure the amount of alcohol that is in the beer. I'll do this until it starts to float. And we'll let this settle down a little bit, and then I'll get my final reading. So the last thing I do after I've transferred the beer into the keg is I'll take a little bit of the sample of the beer off of the keg to get the final hydrometer reading. As you can see, the level that the hydrometer is floating at, it's at 0 or maybe even a bit below 0. And when I did my initial reading for this beer, the Honeybee Ale, on November 1st, the hydrometer reading was 5%. And the final reading is 0. You subtract the two, and that's what gives you your alcohol content. So for this beer, the Honeybee Ale, it's a 5% average by volume alcohol content. It's an all-grain beer. That's why you see the very light amber color. It's going to be a light beer. Let me hold this back here, maybe you can get a sense. But it will be a refreshing light beer with a small taste of honey. More of a summer type of beer, but it'll go very well any time of the year. Now after I've put a layer of CO2 onto the keg, I'll let this sit in my kegerator, and I'll set it overnight without applying any CO2 to it at probably about 34 degrees Fahrenheit. And then I'll begin to carbonate this at about 12 psi, and it'll take 4 or 5 days to carbonate, and then it'll be ready to serve. And that is it for kegging homebrew.